Good evening, folks. Welcome to another episode, Living the Noahide Life Live with Rabbi Moshe Shulman out of Brooklyn, New York. I so appreciate his learned position. He's taken the time to go through Torah Tanakh to try to find us sources that are relevant to Noahides, and it means so much to me. But more so, I'm so overjoyed to see people that come back and listen and learn from a rabbi who's taken that time. It's so important. So let's just jump in and see how the rabbi's doing tonight. Rabbi Shulman, I see you're working away heavy there.
Yeah, I'm trying to get on to see what's going on here.
Well, we've got a couple of people so far on YouTube. We got my friend Veronica down in Washington State. And
yeah, I want to be on Facebook also, so I can see questions coming in. I did that on my Tanakh talk. I was watching there, and I just couldn't find it.
We got somebody by the handle of Shepherd's Outcry out there asking, "I'm in need of tzitzit and wonder what to buy. Please help."
Why would he need tzitzit?
I don't know. He maybe
if he's not Jewish, he doesn't need it.
I think he mentioned in a previous broadcast, Rabbi, that he was going through conversion.
Okay,
and we're joined by Jose Guzman there in New York.
What's the usual way to do a conversion is to listen to what your rabbi tells you. I couldn't find it here, whatever. Listen to what your rabbi tells you to do and what you take on. Different rabbis will suggest doing different things at different times. So just be careful. Remember, because they just tell you to do different things at different times. I never converted, so I don't know. But from what I know from people who have converted, different rabbis will tell you different things.
For sure. No doubt.
Okay. We will start. This is going to be a very heavy session today.
Right on.
Okay, but we'll start a little bit. And remember where we're holding. We're talking about the first mitzvah, which is a mitzvah of not worshiping idols. And again, I'll mention the main points that we've done until now, not review it. The main points that we did, of course, is that idol worship itself, the general category of idol worship, means doing one of four things. Yes. Those four things are either bowing to an idol, slaughtering an animal for an idol. Remember, these were things that were done in the temple. That's why they are considered the categories which apply to any idol, even if that's not the way that idol is usually worshipped. Making a sacrifice, a burnt offering of something like incense or something in that nature, and offering libation, pouring wine, water, I don't know, bourbon, whatever your God requires, Scotch whiskey or whatever beer, whatever your God requires, whatever. Doing it, that's good. Okay. Then the other thing, which is in the main category, is again anything that is the method of worshiping that specific idol. If you do that, then that is considered idol worship, even if it's not one of the four categories. And the example that's given in the Talmud, and it's the easiest one to understand, there was a Greek god called Mercury, and the way of worshiping was to throw a stone at it. So if you throw a stone at Mercury, even if you mean it for a negative reason, because it's a type of worship, you've actually worshipped it. But if you throw a stone at Zeus or at a cross or something like that, that doesn't mean anything, because that's not the way of worship. That's not considered idol. Okay? And then we mentioned the general rule is any kind of worship, any kind of thing with relation to idolatry, which a Jew would be executed for.
Yes.
Forbidden for a non-Jew. And we went through some of those, Moleth and stuff like that. These we don't need to go that again. Those of you who want to know, we can go listen to some of the old tapes, which I suggest you doing. If I keep going, everything will never end, so I have to just a little bit. But I do want to remind these because these are the things that are important. These are the general rules that are important to have in mind. The specifics are good. There's lots of books out there with that, Divine Code. There's other books people talk about it. But these are the general rules. Now, there are things that are forbidden with negative commandments to a Jew. Those things are considered by negative commands for a Jew. It looks like the majority says that a Noahide is not forbidden, meaning they would not get a death penalty for it. It would not be actually forbidden, although it's certainly something you shouldn't do.
An example?
Right. I can't remember the examples. I could look back on the again, listen to my old things. If I keep going over everything again, it'll be another problem. However, the Rambam and a number of authorities who follow the Rambam believe that no, even if it's a negative command, then Even if it's punishable by like a negative commandment, which would be lashes for a Jew, it would be a death penalty for a non-Jew. Okay, and then there's another things that rabbinically not allowed. Those you don't have to worry about because they mostly involve somebody seeing you and thinking that worship an idol when you're not really doing it, something like that. Okay, that's basically all we covered until now. Let me just make sure there's anything else. We went to a lot of specifics of these things, just to give you an idea. So if you want to listen to more specific things, listen to the earlier talks we had on it. But basically, you should have in mind always the basic, the general. It's always good, especially Noahide, so I want to emphasize, it's always good to know the basic. What is the basic thing that Hashem says is forbidden, what's not allowed? And then, the specifics, we'll look at some of the specifics, because many of the specific laws that are involved, they don't really apply too much today. Worshipping Moloch, Aviadoni, these kinds of things, which would be commandments to Jews, they don't apply. So you have to see what applies to you, and many times the actual biblical commands that are applicable to Jews based on the type of worship at that time don't apply today. So if you know what the general thing is, any kind of worship that this idol has, we talked about Christianity. If you go bow before a cross, which is a type of worship, and specifically in Catholic Catholic churches. And that would be considered as an object of worship. The authorities do believe that a cross that's used for worship is considered an idol. The Eucharist is a problem. I would think that is also a type of service. There's prayer said over it, something like that. It's a ritual. Okay, all of these things would be considered idolatrous worship.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we mentioned shittif also as far as belief is concerned. There is a difference between belief or not. And we mentioned that Lamasa, in practical matters, most of those people who come out of Christianity or involved in Christianity today are evangelicals, stuff like that. And basically their belief, no matter what they try to say to themselves, is basically no different than polytheism. Okay, you might end up every once in a while running to somebody who has seen Catholic theology, and that's a little bit more subtle, a little bit more difficult to explain as to why that's also idolatrous. I will, God willing, in my Tanakh talk, when I talk about things about Christianity, I'll deal with that much in length. But that's really a second issue, because as far as things are concerned, a person who really wants to be a Noahide, as the term comes to mean, as we've talked about, such a person could not be a Christian at the same time. It's not possible.
No.
Okay, so let's go on. There's still some more things we want to talk about. There's a number of type of practices and things that are questionable, problematic things, and I'd like to really bring them up because these things can come up every once in a while. One of them is that an object word used for idol worship has a prohibition of using it and getting any kind of enjoyment from it. So, example, let's say there's an idol of some sort, okay? As long as the idol hasn't been destroyed in a certain way and nullified as being an idol, but let's say it's still an idol. You have, I don't know, the Hindu, elephant god, okay? Somebody gives it to you as a present, okay? And you want to, whatever, it's been worshipped in a certain temple in India, and the temple, burnt down, or they turned it into into a Chabad house. Whatever they did to the temple there, it became something else. And they have these idols around, so that it somehow comes here. You're not allowed to have any kind of enjoyment. You can't have anything from it whatsoever. The only thing that's there for is to be destroyed or nullified. Now, interesting enough, the issue comes up with that, and that involves anything. A cross that was used in a worship in a Catholic church, for example, which was an object of worship. Anything of that kind of nature which was used, anything that was candles that were burnt or incense that was used in a Catholic church, for example, as part of the service. These are forbidden because they were things used in idol worship. Okay, you're not allowed to use them at all. Okay, now there is only one type of exception that comes out, which is very interesting. What happens if the person's object of worship is the sun? Okay, you worship the sun. You bow down to the sun every morning when it gets up. And you cry every night when the sun goes down because your God is disappearing for 20, how many hours. Okay, that's your God you worship.
Like the ancient Egyptians?
Yeah, whatever. So, but the question is, are you for what's a person supposed to do? A Jew, Noahide, the same thing as far as that's concerned. In that case, then no, there's no problem with that. You can't do anything about it. I mean, it's not like you have to put on these glasses so you don't have any enjoyment of the sun. No, that's not the way it works. Those things are an exception to the rule. The things that you're not allowed to use are basically
logically. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Basic things you can do. Things like that. Mountains. Somebody learns. The Indians, for example, revere certain mountains. Okay, and that doesn't mean that you can't go there and enjoy it, even though that's what they worship and whatever, because that's just not what you do. Okay, now the question is another thing that's very interesting. What about owning regular statues just for decorative purposes? I don't know, a copy of Michelangelo from David from Michelangelo. Yeah.
Yeah, the Sistine Chapel with the finger touch. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. No, but that's not that. But the statue, I think he has a statue of David.
Of King David.
Right. Oh. So let's say you have a copy of that and you want to have it in your house. Are you allowed to have it? Okay. Now, for decorative purpose, or to selling it to somebody else, whatever. Not for idolatrous purpose, but something that
decorative.
Yeah. There is an argument about that, actually. The majority of sources say there's no problem with that. However, the Rambam says it's actually not allowed. So you should be aware of that. Again, the general rule is you are allowed to do it, but you should know there are some people. Now, what about entering the house of idol worship? Entering the house of idol worship is very interesting. You shouldn't do it. General rule is you shouldn't do it. So you shouldn't go into a church, especially Catholic or Greek Orthodox church where they have idols there specifically. A Protestant church, since they worship, they have idolatrous type of worship, you shouldn't go there either. But it's not the kind of prohibition as strongly as other things. So, for example, if there's a reason you have to go there, I don't know, if you don't go there, you're going to be written out of your mother-in-law's will. So, you could come to, financial, whatever. In that case, you should go. You just have to be very careful that you don't actually do something which violates. So, I don't know. If you go to a Catholic, you have to go to Catholic church, and everybody's taking the Eucharist, you don't go. If you see people bowing down and crossing themselves in front of the cross, you can't do that. Even though, all kinds of things, which probably.
But a family wedding, say a family wedding or something of that.
Yeah, say you go to family wedding. It's in a Catholic church. You could go there, but you have to be careful about certain things, not take part in actual religious ceremonies, which are that. But you can stay there and watch. If you can't get out of it, obviously, there are many things that are put in this position that you have to think. You have to use your mind and think about it. What are you doing? Is it something that is it something that's actually actually doing worship, or you're doing it? Can you get out of it? Obviously you're not going to feel comfortable if telling that relative, I don't really feel comfortable there, but I'll go to the meal afterwards at the hall, the wedding hall where you have this. The wedding meal afterwards, I would go to that. If that wouldn't be a problem too. You have to look at these as in each case. If you can get out of it, fine. If you can't get out of it, don't worry about it. Don't lose any sleep over it. It's not really a problem. It's an uncomfortable thing, but it does come out. Now, oaths. Can one make an oath to an idol? This is where the issue is that is related to shittif comes in. Is swearing by your idol, swearing by Jesus, for example, or something like that. Okay, that's where the issue, or by the saints. It's not clear in Tosfos whether it means the saint or Jesus, but certainly in the Shulchan Aruch, it's certain talking about swearing by Jesus. Okay, or the Trinity, actually, probably what they did at that time. Now, there is a disagreement as to that. Obviously, I don't expect a Noahide to have to do it, but if you were in a court and the court said, you have to swear or whatever. You may be living in a country that has that. I don't really think that really exists nowadays. Making an oath on a Bible, that probably is about the same thing, I guess. You could ask them if you can do it on a Tanakh. They probably let you to do that. I don't know. And if not, the issue is there is a disagreement as to whether it is forbidden or not. The majority view, this basically falls out pretty much on the same thing as the issue of whether shittif is allowed. They're related to each other. We see that the Sephardic rabbis they all prohibit swearing by an idol, whereas the Ashkenaz allow it because it's shittif, whatever, for whatever reasons, the Tamu, but there's significant numbers. So the majority view seems to be to forbid it. But there's a strong minority, especially in European lands, that would allow it. Now, what about there's an idol, and you put clothes on it, and you do it. I don't know who these guys, some Hindu kinds of wackos, but they had the little idol, and they used to dress it up and stuff like that, in all kinds of clothes or something like that, some Indian clothes. What about dressing it up or doing something like that to it, or kissing an idol? Okay, now.
Well, wouldn't that be like the libation question or anything like that?
Okay, now.
Or bending a knee?
Okay, it comes down to the same rules we learned before. If it's not one of the four things that are forbidden, so the question is kissing an idol, if that's the form of worship? So, for example, if part of your worship was to bathe it, you take your idol out to bathe it every single day, wash it up, whatever, it might get dirty, it might soil its pants or something like that, not going to the bathroom, whatever. These idols have to go to the bathroom sometimes. They don't want to do it. They get to hold it in, It's a very bad thing to do.
Oh, my.
It's not very healthy. So anyways, so you have these things. They wash the idol, maybe, if that's part of a specific act of service to the idol. If it's act part, then that would be forbidden because that's the way of worshiping it. Or if you're supposed to kissing the idol, something you have to do, come and kiss the idol. If that's part of the worship service, then it's definitely forbidden. But if it's not part of the worship service, then technically it's not forbidden. Technically it's not forbidden. So it all depends, basically, if
But why do it still?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now let's deal with some other little. I made a few notes of some things, and you might want to look into notes. Maybe people have questions about this. Certain practical things that happen because you have non-Jewish relatives. We talked about if you have a wedding, for example. I mean, if you can't get out of it, just go to the meal. That's fine. If you can't, you just have to avoid any kind of action which would be considered idol worship. You certainly don't want to lose your inheritance just because you don't want to go into a church for a wedding for your sister or brother or grandchildren. There's no requirement to that whatsoever. We will get into it because there's no requirement for a non-Jew to have. To do what's called Kiddush Hashem, to become a martyr, even for idol worship, which we'll get into later on. So we talked about that, and everything you have to, in these kinds of things, you have to use your mind. You have to think carefully what you're doing. How to get out of things you don't want to do, even if theoretically you're allowed to do it. So let's talk about different things because these things do happen. What happens if you have Catholic relatives and they have statues all over their house? In my area, there's some Catholics not far from here. So we see in front of their house they have a thing of Mary with the baby Jesus. Okay? The question is, of course, there's two things about it. Number one is that, is that more ornamental? Well, rather than object of worship, or not. Now, how does it come in? Actually, I should have done the other one first. Let's talk about the crosses. You have a relative, and you go into her house, and she's wearing a cross around her neck. Is that forbidden? What is it forbidden to be around it and whatever? And the answer is no. And the reason why is because that's more of an ornament. The kind of crosses that are forbidden as an idol are the ones you might have in a church, or if, for example, they have a place in their house to pray in their house which has a cross in it. So they pray there with the cross there. That cross is an idol. And so you have to be careful not to bow down in front of it by mistake. If you know, avoid bowing down to it or anything like that of nature. That would be a problem. But if they just have it around, that's fine. I think what appears to me to be the case, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, those things that have Mary and the baby Jesus, they're more ornamental as opposed to being objects.
Yeah, the ones they put out at Christmas time, I'm
not talking about Christmas Resurrection. I'm talking about the people who are really, really, and they have it all year round on their front yards. They have, I do not believe that they pray to it or anything like that. I just think they're more ornamental wise. as to identify, as more to identify that I'm a Christian. Okay, in that case, I would avoid. I would obviously avoid it because it smells like an idol, but even if it's not. But as far as techniques, they have it in their house, for example, and these kinds of ornaments are not really idols. You just have to be careful that you just don't in any way look like you're bowing down to it or something like that, or saying, "Oh, Mary was very pretty. It's a pretty idol." You don't say those kinds of things.
Rabbi, you mentioned smelled. The point being, a lot of evangelicals try to move away from the iconism. They try to get away from the actual. But you've been so clear about what polytheism is. They still get into worship. So when you're into a worship service, even if there's no icons, it's flat out idol worship, is it not?
Yes. The Trinity is actually idol worship. Certainly, the way it's done in where they pray in Jesus' name or they pray to Jesus, something like that. That is definitely idol worship. It's actually it's idol worship because it's polytheism. Okay, the person who's praying is actually believes in polytheism. They believe in a absolute separation. Otherwise, why did they pray to Jesus instead of praying to the Trinity?
Yeah,
at least the Catholic Church is in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, because it's saying, hey, we pray to God who is in Trinity, not as Jesus, who is the difference is significant. When I do Tanakh talk, I'm going to really go into more specific because it would take me a few weeks to do it, and I really don't want to get sidetracked into that. Just to give it, quite frankly, to understand. I mean, I do think there's a couple of people listening who are actually Catholics, so I think that they understand what I'm talking about as far as that's concerned. But as far as Christian, your average evangelical is basically polytheistic. They might say that they don't believe it, and they may actually believe that they don't believe in polytheism. But actually, when you listen to them, what they say, what they believe is actually polytheistic. Just like most of your evangelicals, whatever, believe that they believe actually in the Trinity, in the correct form of it. Whereas you ask them what the Trinity is, they'll give you examples like water. It's made of three molecules, or water has different forms, and those actually very old heresies. They're actually heresies. They are not really the orthodox concept of the Trinity that was known from the creeds and stuff. Again, in my talk, I'm going to go into it. My point is that what you actually do, or what you've actually grown up. Many people who are Christian, what you've actually grown up with is, unbeknownst to you, you are being told you believe in monotheism, where the way your practice actually is you actually practice into polytheism. Okay. So anyways, that's the situation. So let's talk about, you go to your Catholic friends and they have things of Mary and the baby Jesus, or saints or something like that. St. Francis or something like St. Christopher. I don't know the other, St. George. They have these little, these little statues of these. Okay. These things are, unless if they were used for worship, if somebody stands before St. Christopher and asks St. Christopher to help him, then that's a little bit more like an idol worship. But if it's just a medallion of some sort, or they have something that you change around the neck, an ornament of one of the saints, okay, that's not technically an idol, but still, in the same sense, if you're around somebody who has that, you have to be careful that you're not doing an action that would be one of the four. I mean, pouring a libation and stuff like that, I don't think you'd have a problem. But you might actually do bowing towards it. It might happen like that. So you have to be careful about such things like that. But otherwise, it's not a problem. Same thing would go with the Hindu gods. You have a Hindu friend, you rise over his house, and each room has 5 or 6 different ones of these, and you can see his little incense thing that he's got there. Then you got to be a little bit more careful, okay? Because that's a little less subtle.
Rabbi, what about the Buddhists? You know how they're more culturally, societally bent, but they have those rollers that they kind of pray as they whisk, they roll as they walk by. I guess even touching one of those would be.
I don't know. Actually, we didn't learn that in yeshiva, and I haven't really had too much experience with that. But again, if it's something, remember, if they are praying to one of their idols or one of their Buddhas, because remember they believe that Buddhas are pretty much being gods themselves. I guess on the level of saints in the Catholic Church, they're probably about the same type of a level. Maybe a little bit more. In that case, you still have the same problem. If you're praying to somebody other than God, that is idol worship. That's polytheism. That's the basic definition of polytheism. I mean, Jews under the Romans literally were martyred because they would not allow the emperor, who was worshipped as a god, any kind of symbol of the emperor to appeal out in any kind of place. So, obviously that the same thing would apply to that. And again, it would be a thing of idol worship. Again, if somebody tells you if you don't bow down to the Hindu idol or it's going to cut off your head, that's a different story. You can just bow down and say, why, God, did you make me do such a stupid thing like this? And then go, that's okay, don't worry about it. We will get to it in our second part about, we're going to discuss about,
Rabbi, I've worked when I was young. I've worked for a couple of tyrannous people. When somebody's pushing for that kind of almost obeisance, is there really a standard to stand up to that sort of stuff? Or
again, the question is
idol worship is
the short answer is if you're in a position where you're forced to do it, and then the answer is no. There's no prohibition for you to do it. If you're in a position where you're forced, being forced to do something against your will is not. If somebody says, if you don't do it, I'm going to kill you. If you want me to do it, it's going to cost you a certain amount of money, whatever. In that case, a Noahide is not required, as a Jew would be required, to give his life. A Noahide could say, okay, we will get into that exactly because it's actually a biblical story about it. Okay. So essentially, these are the kinds of things that sometimes come up, and I just wanted to go through some of it. See if there's any questions about that. I haven't been able to get the thing working on my phone, so.
Well, Veronica and I have been having a little bit of a debate with Shepherd's Outcry, who's now said Baruch Hashem, but he was really going on about a little bit about the J-Man in Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22, and Veronica and I.
That has nothing to do with the Noahide laws.
No.
That I should bring up a Tanakh talk. We'll get into that stuff. Actually, once I finish this next unit, this whole unit I'm dealing with now in Tanakh talk, I think the next one is I'm going to do the real Messiah, in which case I will touch on some of those things.
Excellent, Rabbi. That's awesome.
Okay.
I'll look forward to seeing that series.
Now, the last thing I want to deal with, which has somewhat of a relationship to this, but not really directly. And I bought the wrong Rambam here. How do you like that? Okay, give me a second. It's just behind me. One of the reasons why I sit here is because I have all the books I need behind me in case, or if it's not there, it's over by my side here. Okay. Yes. In chapter 10, law 9 of the laws of kings.
Laws of kings.
That's where things are talked about. And I like to talk about an issue because it's very important. One of the things that Rambam gives, which is the reason why I associate it with idolatry, is because just like idolatry says that you're not allowed to have another God, the Rambam says you're not allowed to have another religion. Now, if we think about it, I'm going to look at the language there, but if you think about it a second, it does make sense. Because after all, as we've mentioned a few times here, the whole foundation of the Noahide laws is basically in the Torah. So that the only religion that's allowed is basically that which is in the Torah, which is Judaism. And as a Noahide, you're not required to follow Judaism. You have a series of laws, which is not really religion. So you're not allowed to make a new religion. So the Rambam says here very quickly, a non-Jew who is occupied in Torah, he's liable for death penalty, that he's only allowed to be involved in 7 mitzvahs. Same thing with a non-Jew who keeps Shabbos. We'll talk about this shortly. Even in one of the days of the week, if he does it for himself, like Shabbos, then he's also liable for death penalty. And we don't even need to say, I'm directly translating it. Okay, we don't even say if he wants to make a new religion and make mitzvahs for himself from his own thoughts, saying, "Oh, I'm going to do this because I want to do it," for whatever reason. Either he should be a ger tzedek, meaning he should convert for all of 600 mitzvahs, or he should accept all the mitzvahs, or he should stay within his own Torah and not add to it, not take away from it. this will come up. This comes up again, and I do repeat it all the time. The Rambam is quite clear that as far as mitzvahs are concerned, I'm sure I remember I discussed before, that a Noahide is not allowed to take up any mitzvah except for the 7.
But Rabbi, we're hearing a lot of things about moral imperatives and things that make common sense that really have roots in Torah and in a lot of the 613 where there's things that can apply
okay.
to.
Let's discuss. We do because I'm going to discuss. I'm going to bring some things that I think are related to idol worship, where are good things to know how to do. The Torah tells you what you're supposed to do, but there are things that you should do anyways, even if it's not in the Torah itself. These are good character traits. There's a very famous teaching from the Ramban, in the beginning of Parshas Kedoshim, and this is talking about the Jewish people. It's not really related to the non-Jews, but the issue raising is, we do see rabbinic sources that talk about non-Jews in the same way. It says, why is there a specific command for the Jews to be holy? Because the Ramban says that without that, a person could be following the Torah and be a very disgusting person. He could do a lot of things that are basically disgusting and not holy. So Hashem says you should be holy because holiness is actually a certain type of separation. He's separated from certain things. And so we have a lot of Jewish moralistic works which talk about, good character traits. Now the sources talk about various things, and I'm going to have a whole class on this later on, those things beyond it. Where you will see in sources, so let's, for example, to Moshe Feinstein in his responsa, he talks about prayer. And he says quite clearly that a non-Jew is not required to pray anything. And every rabbi I've spoken to, by the way, says that. Even those who will give you prayer books and stuff, I would say, is that the prayer books are more of a suggestion. When we look at Brit Oila, for example, it's a suggestion. It's not saying that you have to do this. It's hey, people come to me, I want to pray. What can I pray? So, okay, listen, these are things, these are suggestions, giving ideas what to do. Okay, there's no requirement of prayer. However, the Moshe says specifically that if you have a need, if there's a problem, one of your relatives are sick or something like that, and you need something, then of course you're because you believe in God, which is great to do. Then of course it's understood you're going to pray to God. What are you supposed to do in such a way? So that's not considered making new religion. That's something that's required. So in a sense, there's a lot of things like that. I see many people trying to say, well, logical. What do you mean logical? Okay, I think it's logical, or God thought it was logical. Okay, you have to remember that. Okay.
Moral imperative is a word that I've heard.
Remember, the fundamental thing is you're trying to make the world be a better place. Right. Now, if it's something that makes the world function better, then it's something you should do. Just not be even. You don't have to be commanded to do it. I mean, for example, there's no real commandment to give charity to help people, but
it's a good thing to do.
But you don't need to be, just because God didn't command you to do it doesn't mean you're not allowed to do it. I mean, you should do it because it shows a certain thing.
Be loving to your child and things like that.
It's not necessarily. It's not a religious obligation. So, except as opposed to, for example, if I give charity, there's a mitzvah in the Torah that says I'm supposed to give charity at times. There's mitzvahs that tell me. So I am commanded to do it. If I don't do it, then it's a sin. If an Noahide doesn't give charity, it's not a sin. It's just if you do it, it shows. If you don't do it, shows something about you. Not necessarily doing against what God wants to, but it shows there's something wrong with you. Okay? And so in that, you have to look at is this really the right way? We're going to talk about a little bit by the end of the day, hopefully, a couple of things as far as character traits.
Rabbi, can I throw you 2 quick questions from some of the audience out there? Just 2 short questions. First, on Facebook, Catherine's asking to back up a little bit about talismans. What exactly is a talisman, and what about talismans can you?
I have no clue. I have no clue what a talisman is.
Yeah, it's more just an icon that is more like a charm or a pendant, something that somebody ascribes. You're into sorcery, and
it certainly depends what it's being used for. Okay, if it's just an ornament, then it's nothing. If it's been used for something like divination or something like that. Or that if it's used for good luck, that's
a rabbit's foot.
That's sort of like a borderline thing.
Okay, and we got one other person mentioning about prayer, about things that you should not be doing. Somebody saying if I decide to walk and pray every morning and put that upon myself, but they're not commanded to do it, would that be considered all right?
Okay, the problem with that is this is a discussion I've had with a lot of people. I remember
Right.
Rabbi Blumenstiel and Rabbi Weiner, and nobody can give me a clear answer because it appears not to be discussed in the literature because there never was a Noahide movement. Never had Noahides and people around there who even thought these ways. So the question comes up is what if you think you have in your mind, maybe every morning I say a certain prayer. And you make it into like a ritual. You say, if you feel personally obligated to it, does that means that you made a new mitzvah for yourself or not?
Right.
It's not clear. Again, my feeling is this.
I think they need to hear this because this is where the line
Yeah,
is.
my
Are you
understanding
making it a
is-
new obligation?
Again, my understanding is once you feel you're obligated, once you feel psychologically you're required to do something because it's related
You own
to
it.
God,
Yeah.
then it's based, whether you want to call it you've taken on a mitzvah or not, then you obviously have taken on a mitzvah, and that's a problem. Okay?
That's where a religion gets formed.
That's why you see in the prayer book that you have from Brit Oilum and the other ones,
Yeah,
they will
yeah.
say, hey, this is just a suggestion, because basically they're covering themselves. Okay? If you take it more than that, then that's your mistake, but we warned you that's not what it's for. That's why I'm always way far out there as far as these concerned, talking against it, because I want you to
No,
realize
you're the voice of reason from a strong side of the
right.
table. Yeah.
It's like this, there's a balance here going on, and you have to understand the balance. You're going to see it because I'm going to talk now about Shabbos specifically as an added-on mitzvah and how it works, and you'll see what people are doing that they're like trying to technically not be doing it. So you have to understand. All the rabbis I know who are involved, who are knowledgeable people involved, have this problem that they deal with people who are very sincere.
Yes.
They very much want to serve Hashem how Hashem wants, but they also, their only background that they have, the only thing is knowing from the Torah and from Judaism, you got to do these things. Jews get up, I get up, before sunrise to pray.
It's like fake it till you make it kind of thing.
No. Listen, I assume people are sincere. So I'm not going to argue about that. People are sincere, whatever. I mean, I give my advice what I think is the best way. But again, I deal with sincerity here. So you guys don't have to set up. I mean, I get up, half hour or more before sunrise. I get up and I pray, and I pray as the sun rises. It's a certain time of day. I mean, most people don't. I do. Israel, it's very common. Okay. I do certain things. My day is ritualized, and there's a lot of reasons for that just are because Jewish people have to do things because they want us to. Hashem wants us to look differently. He wants us to act differently, look differently. It's part of being separated is to look differently. It's like belonging to a club. If you belong to the Masons, something like that, they have all kinds of different things. All kinds of you belong to that club, so there's certain things that are there because. So that's fine, but a Noahide doesn't have that. Okay, a Noahide has a different purpose to make things work. So, but I understand coming out of Christianity, you feel you need to have a close relationship with God. Okay, and that's prayer. I'm going to talk about prayer much more. So you have to say, as long as you don't feel psychologically obligated to do it, then there's no problem. But once you feel psychologically obligated to it, the question is, have you now made it a mitzvah or not?
Right.
Now, there's no clear answer to that. I've discussed with a lot of people. I know as far as Judaism is concerned, if you do a certain act 3 times, that is considered as a mitzvah, and you actually have to nullify your oath to stop doing it. In fact, we do it once a year. Okay? So it's a very serious thing as far as the Jews are concerned. But oaths don't apply to non-Jews in the same way. Okay? So again, what it is, it's an area that I don't know anyway. So as far as that's concerned, my thing is like this. It's going to be for you as an individual, but you have to. If you feel psychologically obligated, then you've said to yourself, what do you call it a mitzvah? Not you made it a mitzvah. Okay. In that case, don't do it.
Rabbi, and one of the earliest things you said when we started broadcasting together was you talked against religious neurosis or religious neurotic people, and they think that psychological neurotic behavior somehow gives them a leg up when in reality you need to stay real. I think
Right, right.
I appreciate you speaking so clear about
So let me talk about the issue of an extra religion. Actually, I can go over it with you. And not talk. I have to be careful for the hour, but I can go a bit longer because I do want to go through this. We talked about adding mitzvahs. Okay, the Rambam is quite clear about that. Even those sources that say that the Rambam says you can add mitzvahs, the Moshe Feinstein says that's absolutely false. A misunderstanding of that, and we discussed it a little bit earlier, and we might discuss it sometime later again if it comes up. Even those who say you can, one of the conditions is you can do it as a mitzvah. So anything I say here is you can't be doing for mitzvah. So the one thing I want to bring up mostly, because this is the one that everybody comes over, is Shabbos. If you listen to rabbis who are talking about Shabbos, you have to be a scholar in the Talmud to actually understand what they're telling you. So I'm going to try and unpack it for you to understand very clearly. Okay? The problem is, and you hear people, even the Ger people that I've spoken to, they're also careful because they've been told this way, but they don't actually catch what they're being told. And so let's talk about Shabbos, because I want to make clear how serious Shabbos is and how much, the prohibition for a non-Jew to keep Shabbos is. I mean, the Talmud says that you're liable for a death penalty. That's a pretty heavy thing,
Yes, it wouldn't say it if it wasn't genuine.
It wouldn't say it. I mean, the penalty is a death penalty from him. So I want to look at a couple of things. First, what I had to do is I want to read a prayer. Now, every Jewish person says this. So you have to remember, those rabbis who are talking to you, talking about things that you could do on Shabbos and telling you not to do, what they're trying to. I'm going to do Rav Schwartz is what Rabbi Yoel Schwartz, what he is here, and I'll explain to you, unpack it. So you see, what he's trying to say is actually what I'm trying to explain to you now. Okay, we don't disagree about this. The only thing is I strongly disagree about what he advises you to do, because I don't think that it's possible for a human being to actually do what he does. He says you can do without violating the Rambam, what he says you're supposed to do, even though theoretically, there may be. I just don't think as human beings we can do it. It's just the nature of us as human beings. But we'll get into that. Okay? There's a prayer we say every day, every Shabbos, the day of Shabbos. And it's like 3 paragraphs. I will read the Hebrew prayer. Yismach Moshe Mazachelkai. Moses, was very happy with the portion, the gift of his portion that he got. Ki Eved Neman Kedusah, because he was called a faithful servant. That's in Numbers, by the way. Numbers 15, I think it is. It's called it's pull it up. Yeah, it's at the end of Parshas, I think it's Bullock. At the end of Parshas Bullock. Okay. Klil Teferes B'Roishay Nesatulai. You gave him a crown of glory. But Amdoi Lufanecha, when he stood before you on Mount Sinai. When Moshe stood before Hashem on Mount Sinai, he was given a crown of glory to wear. Ishnai lichas avuna haribudor, and 2 tablets of stone you brought down. V'chusa behem, and it's written in them what? Shemira Shabbos, keeping the observance of the Shabbos. V'kain klusa b'sar sech, and this is what it says in the Torah.
What verse are we on, Rabbi?
This is a prayer. It's a prayer.
I see.
Okay. Then it says in the Torah. Actually, this brings this next thing, it says in Exodus 31:16-17, V'shamini b'la Yisrael as HaShabbos, the Jewish people should keep the Shabbos. La'asas Shabbos l'sam, b'lis aylam, they should do the Shabbos for all generations as an everlasting covenant. B'ayni ivai b'nai Yisrael, between me and the Jewish people, oisilam, this is a sign, an eternal sign between me and the Jewish people. That Hashem created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. This Shabbos is for the Jewish people as a sign. That's what we say every Shabbos. And the 7th day, he rested and was rested. He stopped from working, he was rested. It sounds bad in English, but in Hebrew it's different words. I mean, nufash means like resting, like physically. Shabbos means like you stopped from doing work. But, in English, he rested and he rested. Translations are sometimes very difficult because the 2 types of means resting. Resting means he ceased from doing work. The other resting means he rested. Okay. Then it continues. The prayer. This is the prayer continues after saying that verse. which is very clear in saying that the Shabbos is given to the Jewish people as a sign for them specifically. And he did not, Hashem, your God, did not give this to the nations of the world. And he didn't inherit this. Your king didn't inherit this to the worshippers of images, of idols. And also your rest, the rest of the Shabbos, he did not give upon to the uncircumcised. Now notice he's using whatever, he's basically covering himself, any kind of word for non-Jew you could want to come up with. Idol worshiper, non-nations of the world, uncircumcised, anything he can get, somebody, any non-Jew he can get. Doesn't make a difference if they believe any non-Jew. But to the Jewish people, to Israel, his people, he gave with love. The Zayda Yankov, to the descendants of Jacob, Asher Bambachad, who he has chosen out. Okay? Every Jew says that. So every single rabbi who's talking to, who's, answering question, what are you supposed to do, what do you got to do on Shabbos, is doing it with the context of something they say every single Shabbos, understanding that. And it's pretty clear that Shabbos is for the Jewish people only. That says it there. Continuing, there's a very, very nice medrash in Medrash Rabbah, Devurim. Let me close this here. I saw this in a very interesting work called, there's a Rabbi Blech has a work on contemporary problems, and he talked about an issue dealing with somebody who was in process of conversion who circumcised but hadn't gone to the mikveh yet, whether they can keep Shabbos. So it's a whole discussion about whether they're allowed to keep Shabbos or not. Okay, so he brings a phenomenal medrash. This medrash is unbelievable. What it says here. So it's in the first chapter of the Medrash Rabbah, Sefer Devurim, Deuteronomy, paragraph 21. And it's talking about basically what starts the discussion before is a law of Shabbos, that if you're walking with, let's say you and I are walking somewhere together, and I have a whole bunch of stuff that I'm carrying, and it's almost Shabbos. So it says you should take the stuff you're carrying and give it to, I should take the stuff that I'm carrying, I should give it to you to carry it for me on Shabbos. I give it to you before Shabbos, you carry it until we get to where we got. Okay, I'll give it to you. It assumes I'm going with a non-Jew that I can trust that he's not going to steal my stuff or whatever. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So it talks about this, and it explains that. The Amr Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina is giving a reason. Okay? Shabbos, we call Aved Chachum, it's any non-Jew, really, essentially here, but it says, I would worship it. Anyone, Shomer Shabbos. If you read it, the wording here makes it clear it's not talking about somebody who's still worshiping with eyes. Aved Chachumim, Sheshamas Shabbos, who keeps Shabbos, Ad Shlo Kibul Ulayv Es Hamila, before he has been circumcised. So we're talking about somebody who's non-Jewish, in the process of becoming Jewish, but hasn't circumcised yet. Chayav Misa, he's still under the ban of keeping Shabbos and is liable to a death penalty. By the way, anybody you know who's converted has always been told that they have to make sure that they don't keep Shabbos. They should violate something willfully, showing that they're not keeping Shabbos because of this. There's a reason why. Because until they have converted, they're still under that ban. For why? Because they weren't committed. How do you see how do you see this? What are you seeing that they should be chayav misa? Where does it come around? What's your understanding? What's the reason for it? Yeah, we know it's chayav misa, but why? Why? What's the reason for it? The Medrash says beautifully. This is so beautiful. Omer Rabbi Chia ba'Abba, Rabbi Chia ba'Abba said, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, the name is Rabbi Yochanan. B'noyag sheba'olam, the custom of the world is like this. Melech emet matriyim, Yoshem Masichen zeh im zeh. If a king and a queen are sitting together talking, they're sitting together talking. And some guy comes in and he sits himself between the king and the queen, interrupting him. Einu Chayav Misa, he's going to get killed for that?
Oh yeah, no tact
The king and
whatsoever.
the queen are sitting together, talking together, and this guy comes in and says and gets in between them. He's going to be killed, obviously. Kach, same thing. Hashabbos, Hazeh. Same thing with Shabbos. Bain Yisrael, Bain HaKadosh Baruch Hu is between Israel and Hashem. Shenemar, as it says, that very verse that we said on our Shabbos prayer, that's from Exodus 31. Bain Yisrael, between me and the Jewish people, is between us two. It's like the king and the queen sitting together, talking to one another, communing with one another, and he comes and sits in between them. Therefore, any non-Jew who comes between, the reason is that by doing it, by taking on the Shabbos, what you are doing is you're interrupting a connection that Hashem wants to have with the Jewish people. It's said specifically there. It's a beautiful matter. The Medrash is beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful Medrashim I've seen.
Rabbi, I've heard it said that it's like a child intentionally walking in on their parents' bedroom. Like it just shouldn't happen. It should be respected.
The Medrash does not talk in such language. It would
no, but I've heard somebody say it like that, and the point of the matter just being that there are certain things that are just best left alone, and we live in a day and age where people think they can grab anything.
Shabbos is a very special relationship between Jewish people and Hashem, and until somebody converts, they can't keep it. Now, this will bring questions to a lot of minds because we know almost everybody says, what do I do? They'll tell you different things to do. So let's go on. I want to go again into the Talmud talking about this because I want you to understand what these people are doing and what if you're going to follow any of these advice, how you can do it without causing a problem. Although I would tell you not to do it. Yeah,
I know you would.
Because it's quite frankly,
it's better to be safe than sorry.
No, it's because I don't really think that a person could do it. I don't think you can do it without psychologically eventually taking it onto yourself as if it was a mitzvah. That's the whole problem. It maybe I would run into somebody that I know personally. I say, I understand you could do it. You could make sure every time before you say, I'm not doing this for a mitzvah, whatever, and psychologically, then maybe that, but that's certainly not something you tell everybody to do. Okay, so the usual place where the discussion of this comes about that I've seen, that's quoted, say, 1 second, there's a passage in the Talmud, in Tractate Krisis, 9a. So let me tell you what, I will translate it again, if I can find it. Here you go. Omer Abba Barahabit, says, I'm bringing it before what they don't usually contemplate, okay? After it says a certain teaching from about bringing a sacrifice, if you actually do conversion, bringing a sacrifice. Omer Abba Barahabit, Haluch Rabbi Shimon. The Haluch is like Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara says, there are those who have taught this a different way. What does it mean the Haluch is like Rabbi Shimon? Because if the Gemara says the Haluch is like Rabbi Shimon, that's the fact. When the Gemara says something's a halacha, nobody ever in the future ever disagrees with it anymore. Because the Gemara tells us now this is what the conclusion was. Many times the Gemara doesn't say what it is, so you have later discussions, which way do we follow, whatever. It says clearly that. So it says no, there's others that it's talking about this particular thing that we're going to teach right now. Okay? So what does it say there? And I'm sure you've heard this before because a lot of people say, 1 second, the Talmud says you're allowed to do it, and this is what it says. Ahuda, on this, the Tunabin, which rabbis taught us in a different place, that it's really talking about this one. What Rabbi Shimon says here is what the halacha is. That's what's talking about. The halacha is like Rabbi Shimon is referring to this particular teaching, not to another teaching. Ger Toshev mitel asas melucha b'Shabbos b'atzmai. A ger Toshev is allowed to do on Shabbos a melucha for himself. And remember, there's no ger Toshev today, anyways. But there's some people want to say, "Nah, I can be a ger Toshev, whatever." It's whatever. I'm not. We don't talk about. He is like a Jew, like on Cholamayid. Okay, well, essentially it means that you're forbidden to do things except for certain instances, and that's really complicated. Okay, Rabbi Akiva says, "K'Yisrael b'Yantiv, like a Jew on Yantiv, means you're forbidden to do work, but on Yantiv, you're out to do a 40 indeed." Okay, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Ger Toshev Oisa b'Shabbos Atzma Ki Yisur B'Chol. And Rabbi Yossi says that a Ger Toshev does on Shabbos what he would do in the week. Okay? Rabbi Shulman Omer, there's Rabbi Shulman who we know the Halacha is going to follow him, so that's what he says. Eichad Ger Toshev, same a Ger Toshev, but Eichad Eved, and also a slave, the Imma and a female slave, Hatoshvim. This is referring to a specific type of a slave that you have who is not converted. There's an Eved Kanani which goes through a certain type of conversion and is required to do all the commandments that a woman is. And then it's called an Eved Toshev, which means that they're only taking on the 7 mitzvahs. Okay? Now,
that's pretty clear.
An Eved Toshev and the Ger Toshev don't exist today anymore. Okay, that's clear from that. But anyways, whatever. Hatoshvim. Oisel melucha b'Shabbos atzman kisur b'chol. He says they do work for themselves like a Jew does on the weekday.
A weekday.
Okay, that's Rabbi Shulman. If you look at all the halachas spurim, you will see that this is the result that we hold, that's the halacha, that a non-Jew could do the work for themselves. Remember, for themselves is the point. Okay, there's another issue about what they're allowed to do for if you're a slave, for example, which is what it's talking about here, for somebody, or if you work for somebody, the law is about that. What are you allowed to do? Which is really what is that Jew allowed to ask a non-Jew to do for them, depending what they are. Okay, but here it's clear for themselves they're allowed to do anything. So the only non-Jew who would not be allowed to do work on Shabbos would be a non-Jewish slave, because they're basically pretty close to being a Jew.
Well, yeah. And you wouldn't expect them to do something that you couldn't do yourself or shouldn't do yourself.
Well, no, I'm just talking about what they can do for themselves. For themselves, they're not even allowed, because they, by becoming an Eved Kanani, remember, to become an Eved Kanani, you have to have circumcision and you have to go to the mikveh, almost like a convert, except instead of being converted to be a Jew, you convert to be a slave. What it is essentially like this. If a Jew, okay, let me explain. It's called Eved Kanani, but it means any non-Jewish slave. So, for example, let's say, okay, I'm sorry, I have to use an example. Let's say I bought you as my slave. I now own you, okay? Now, in order to keep you, the Talmud says that I really have to make you what's called an Eved Kanani. I have to have you circumcise yourself and go to the mikveh. And when you do that, once you've done that, you are now required to keep all the mitzvahs that a woman's allowed to keep, is required to keep, okay? Okay, as opposed to somebody converts completely, that because I own you, you are now my property. That's basically what the law is. Okay, so because I own you, there's different things. Once I own you, by the way, what happens is not only what you're required to, but because I own you, you are my property. You're like an extension of me, and that's why the Torah says that you're not allowed to do any work for me.
It's purity in your household, is it not?
You become an extension of me because I own you. It's only if I own you, not if I rent you. Say I rent you to do things for me. That's different. That's a different story.
Totally different. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I did.
We will come up to that issue shortly, because I want to go into Shulchan Aruch, which is also misunderstood by a lot of people, because certain things. Okay. Now the next one is in Masechtas Yevamos 48b. Where are you here? I just lost it here. 48b. There's a Rashi which is somewhat confusing to people, and Tosfos tries to explain it. So it mentions the Ger Toshev here, because here we're discussing issues about keeping Shabbos or not, when one's supposed to keep it, whatever. So it mentions the Ger Toshev here. So Rashi explains here what a Ger Toshev means differently than other places, and Tosfos is going to explain what he says. So Rashi says a Ger Toshev means somebody who's accepted upon himself not to worship idols and eats non-kosher meat. And it says that he's warned about Shabbos, that he's not allowed to violate Shabbos. Okay? No, so his Ger Toshev keeps it. Now Tosfos explains this by pointing out that Rashi is in contradiction to what it says in some other place. Okay? Now, Tosfos is a very long discussion about it, but he brings at the end what exactly he's talking about. He says that the truth of the matter is a ger toshev is not required about Shabbos. What it's talking about here, that he's not allowed to do any work for a Jew, because a Jew is not allowed to ask a non-Jew to do certain work. And in this case, being a ger toshev, it becomes more of a biblical commandment not to do it. Okay? So that's what Tosfos says here. And that, in fact, is the law. I would be allowed to ask you to do certain things on Shabbos, not everything. It's very complicated. I'm not going to go into everything. I have to know what I'm allowed to ask you. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. No, it does get pretty deep, but it sounds like these are things that were tried and true and proven and worked through. And
so now, we see that this is what the Talmud, the end of the Talmud is understood, that a non-Jew, no matter what, ger toshev, avid toshev, whatever, does on Shabbos for themselves anything they want. Okay? As far as for a Jew, that's a different story. That's the whole thing. What a Jew's allowed to not do is a whole different story. That's not what's talking about. Now, these things I'm sure are pretty familiar because these discussions go around all the time. The one place that is brought in is usually there's a discussion in the Mishnah Brura about a ger toshev supposedly having accepted upon themselves something that they can accept upon that worship Shabbos, whatever. So I'd like to explain what that's about also. The source of it is actually the Mogen Avram. And the Mogen Avram is talking on in 3 or 4 of the last chapter. Now, many people don't understand what the last chapter is talking about because it really doesn't, the last law in that chapter is talking about. What it says is this. Akam Guma, a complete non-Jew, Shahi Sucha, that he is rented. Okay? His master is not required to make sure that he doesn't rest on Shabbos. Now, Mogen Avram talks about here, and all this form talk about why is he not required to? He's not required to because he doesn't own him. Now, the question, what do we mean by a sucha here? It doesn't mean that you work for somebody. A sucha here means, if you read what it says here, is that he's like a slave, but you're only renting him, meaning you have to pay him. The word in English that I believe this is talking about is, we call it an indentured servant, because it talks about here that even if he's a servant for a number of years, doesn't make a difference. The commentaries on the Torah, Shulchan Aruch talks about that even if he does for a number of years, it's talking about somebody who's there for a number of years, that you own him. It's called indentured servitude. You used to have. You used to, become an indentured servant for a certain amount of years, and then you would go out afterwards. But you don't own him because he goes free. But he is your slave because he's indentured to you. So the question is, are you required like a regular slave or not? And the answer is no. Even though he's indentured to you, say 4, 5, 10 years, however much it is, and afterward he goes free, because he goes free, you don't own him. It's only considered a slave to you that the biblical command applies if you actually own him physically. You could sell him. You could do, he owns him physically. Then the biblical command applies. The person that's like an indentured servant is not applied. So he has a discussion here about it. And what becomes a little confusing is it talks this indentured servant that it says his master is not commanded to do anything, because the Torah does not command us to worry about as a Jew about any kind of slave I have except the one that I own permanently. Okay? But however, if this servant, this indentured servant, would accept upon himself as it came into indentured servitude, then he would not be allowed to do work on Shabbos. That's what it says here. It's a view of me. Now,
Rabbi, how did this work out? Like they used to have a debtor's prison, or where a debt would be repaid by a person, being a slave for a period of time.
that's like indentured servitude.
I see.
Okay? But here what's talking about what they used to have is you have to have slaves. I mean, remember slavery was around until only,
Well, they call it the job now.
let's go back 200 years and that slavery was all over the world. Okay, slavery was considered a norm. It was allowed. Okay, nowadays we consider it morally repugnant. Fine, but it was something 200 years ago that was morally accepted. In
a just person would look after.
Okay, okay, in all societies, serfdom in Europe. Okay, in all societies it was considered something. There were different types of slavery involved. Serfs, were not same types of slaves as other
even war captures, people that have been captured.
People captured or were enslaved. Yeah, these kinds of things. It's very common. Have to realize this is what it was more than 20 years ago. So indentured servitude was also something that was there, very common. Okay, so what he's talking about, when you become indentured servant, how do you become indentured servant? To become a slave, you go into the mikveh and everything like that. You become, and you accept upon yourself to be a slave. Indentured servant can, apparently according to this, an indentured servant can also do something similar to that. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. However, he ends by pointing out that we don't accept slaves, meaning those slaves that have a kabul can accept upon themselves any kind of mitzvahs, or a ger tosha today. So the Mogen Avim says it's not even a guide. It has nothing to do with today anyways. But this particular case where you could have somebody who wants to be an Eved Sucha, which is basically an indentured servitude, a type of slave, a bought slave, what we call it, whatever, that this person could accept more, but we don't have this today anyways. Okay. And the reason
it helps us to understand a lot.
Yeah, but the basic reason is because we don't own him. Okay. Now there's a very long here in the in whatchamacallit, in the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, in Mishnah Berurah, 1 second here. Now, what you have to understand, first let's go to the Mishnah Berurah before, there's a bar haluch from the Mishnah Berurah. But let's first go into the Mishnah Berurah because the Mishnah Berurah explains exactly what I'm talking about. He says here that a non-Jew, complete non-Jew, shehi sucha, that you rented him. Now he makes clear, what does this mean? Afilu imhi sucha l'kamishon. Even if the rent that you own him that you rented him is for many years. Okay. Now this to me, I understand to be indentured servitude. You buy him for a number of years, and that's the only thing I come in. Okay. And he says even though this case, since you don't own him, he's allowed to do anything he wants.
Like what about the deal between Laban and Jacob? Like the 7 years for this.
No. Oh, that was different. That's because of a dowry payment.
Okay, that was a dowry, but was that still?
That's where he paid it out.
I see.
It says it specifically, you changed my wages, 10 times, so, okay. Now the Mishnah Berurah here talks about that the same issue, the issue that it is possible for somebody to accept upon themselves more, including Shabbos, like a woman, which would be an Eved Kanani. When they get circumcised and they immerse themselves, they have to keep the mitzvahs like a woman. Okay. But again, there's no practical thing because today we don't have ger tosha. Okay, so we don't have ger tosha, we don't have an Eved Sucha, we don't have any of this kinds of stuff today. Okay, so again, let's go over the conditions. Are here is according to the Mogen Avim, it's doesn't relate to today. So the whole discussion in the Mishnah Berurah is about something that doesn't relate today, anyways. So whether you accept what the Mishnah Berurah says, the Mogen Avim is talking about says it doesn't relate today, and he doesn't talk about that any differently. The sucha that he's talking about is basically indentured servitude, somebody you buy for a number of years. Okay. Another problem is that those people who think that they can. Okay. Let's say.
This is key. Yeah.
Okay. This is key. That means you have to keep. Let's take an Eved Kanani. Okay. You are my slave. Okay. I bought you, Dan. I bought you out. You're mine for the rest of my life, and when I die, God forbid, when I die, my son is going to inherit you, okay? And you will be his slave after I die. Since I'm older than you, I will probably go before you. So, okay, if that happens, you would be inherited by my children. or they might sell you off for the money. Whatever. Okay. You would be, because you are somebody that I own. Okay. Okay. Under such a condition, you have to keep Shabbos because you have to keep the mitzvahs like a woman has to keep. Okay. And I have to be, the Torah tells me I have to make sure I don't have you violated. Okay. Now, the problem with that is, just think a second. If you have that kind of an obligation, okay, or, those people think that a ger toshva can accept upon himself Shabbos, okay? If you have that obligation, that means you have to be careful on every single thing in Shabbos. That means you have to know all kinds of complicated laws of what you're allowed to do and what you're not. And if you don't keep them, if you accept it to keep Shabbos and you don't keep them, then you have violated Shabbos. And you have the same punishment anybody else has violated Shabbos. So really, that's why if you read carefully what all these rabbis, they never tell you to keep Shabbos, or that you can accept Shabbos, really accept real Shabbos. And if you listen sometimes on the ger fellows, they also, I'm keeping a ger Shabbos, I'm not keeping the real Shabbos. Why have
New religion there, right?
They're actually nitpicking, and because they're keeping parts of Shabbos, but again, if you keep parts of Shabbos with an obligation in your mind, then maybe you think you're obligated, so you made a mitzvah. What's the difference if you think you take the mitzvah? Okay, but what about it is, why are they saying that? Because they know, and everybody who's teaching knows, that if I tell you have to keep Shabbos, that means you have to keep everything. All of this, the 39, you have to stay away from all of the 39 things that are forbidden to do on Shabbos, and those are pretty complicated.
Oh, Rabbi, I'm not even aware of all the details, and it's just, yeah.
No, there's nobody there. There's nobody there who knows. I can tell you all kinds of things that would come about. I'll just give a certain example. You would not be able to have a picnic in your backyard on Shabbos, because by doing so, you're going to probably spill some water on the grass, and you're not allowed to water your grass on Shabbos. So you would
where's the fear of heaven? Where is the fear of heaven?
So again,
I think.
So even those people. So again, what the rabbis are telling, we're going to go very clear. I would do Rabbi Schwartz because if you hear what I just said now, and you now look at what Rabbi Schwartz says, or you listen to one of the other rabbis say about doing Shabbos, you could do this or this. You have to be careful. It's because the background is exactly what I'm telling you. You're not allowed to keep Shabbos, okay? And you're not allowed to do anything on Shabbos feeling that's an obligation that you have to do it. Once you feel psychologically you're obligated to do it, then you've gone too far and you have to back off. Okay? But if not, if you want to keep Kiddush every once on Friday night, or you want to light candles every once, but if you want to light candles every week, eventually you're going to feel it's an obligation. You're going to feel that if you didn't do it, let's say 1 week came by and you didn't do it, you're going to feel bad you didn't do it. Once you feel bad, didn't do it, that means that psychologically you've decided you're obligated on it.
Yeah, you took your mental ownership. Yeah.
Then you basically made it to a mitzvah, but you're not supposed to make it to a mitzvah. No, those who tell you you're supposed to do something are saying, whatever, go to a baseball game one time, go to a football game another time, anything that, whatever. Okay, so let's do Ab Schwartz, what he says here. I have a few objections to some of the things he puts in here because I think it's inaccurate, because Tosfos disagrees with what he says here, but that's different. Okay, so it says Shabbos. Hanachash Shabbos Chayv Misa. A non-Jew who keeps Shabbos is Chayv Misa. L'chaim therefore. Isur le'udam afilu he nimtza b'teiluch l'ger l'sham Shabbos. That means it's forbidden for a person, even if he's in the process of conversion, to keep Shabbos. We know, everybody knows. And this is what the Huluchos Masa. This is actually the way we Jewish people do it. Okay? Now he starts it off with that. Doesn't say anything different. 100%. Absolutely not a question. Okay. Now, in any case, there seems to be another view. But he dies Rashi. This is the view of Rashi in Yevumas and in Krisis, which Tosfos says is incorrect. That a ger toshva has to keep Shabbos. That's not true. Has to keep Shabbos in the sense of he's not allowed to do not for himself, but he's not allowed to do for a Jewish person something. A Jewish person can't ask him to do something, not for himself. That's what Tosfos says. That's what all the commentaries talk about. That therefore a Noahide who has taken upon himself mitzvahs Yesh mukum gadan oisam kager tosha. There's a place to say they're like a ger tosha, which we do. We consider Noahide as being like ger tosha in a lot of ways. We're not so much because essentially they don't worship idols. So the view that says you can live among Jewish people because you don't worship idols, well, that's whatever. So there are lenient opinions, but they're not a ger tosha. But we treat them like that way. So they themselves can't act like they're a ger tosha for those things that are required, but we'll teach them and treat them in certain ways like that. That they should be required to keep Shabbos, or at the minimum, or they should be allowed to keep Shabbos. Now, the problem with that, of course, is based on Rashi. Okay, and Rashi's view is confusing in many different places. He says different things in different places. And Tosfos explains that Tosfos was from the Talmidim for Rashi, the students for Rashi, and they explained that what Rashi really meant to say is that a person who does these things, is not allowed to do for a Jew things, but for himself he's allowed to do, as the Gemara says.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's living. That's living.
Yeah. Okay. So Hatzia Amasa's opinion today. So what comes out of this? What we're supposed to do about this? Lo shmiras Shabbos yehidus. You don't keep the Shabbos like a Jew. You've heard this all the time, right? You don't keep a Jewish Shabbos. You should keep the concept of Shabbos. No, you should.
Now, I hope people. Do you hear what he just said?
Keep the concept. The concept of Shabbos. The concept of Shabbos. What does that mean? That means Shabbos B'Raishis, the first Shabbos. What means first Shabbos? There was no prohibition of doing work on the first Shabbos. What did Hashem do when he rested on Shabbos? He stopped talking. Remember, he created everything with his word. B'dvar Hashem Shmayim Nasa, with the word of Hashem, the heavens were created. What did Hashem do the 7 days? He said, let there be this, let there be this, let there be this. All he did is talk, We say talk is cheap, but when Hashem talks,
everything in creation moves, sure.
Okay, so that's what it's talking about here. So that's what Shabbos. It's like that. It's not like a rest day where there's actually laws. You're supposed to do this. You're not supposed to do that. It's just a concept. Hamas was said, Shahi Yom Shvi, the 7th day. Yom Shabbat Udim Isaac is binding to God said that Adam was thinking of the greatness of Hashem, his God's B'ris Olam, the creation of the world. Lo Shabbos is not the Shabbos of Jewish people. Shehi Inyan Miyuchad, what something that's specifically the Jewish people. Of course, we say in the prayers. Hayin sheyesh ulay v'asas ayta murucha kedai shelo yekavah goyish Shabbos. Therefore, you have to be careful that you do something that you're showing you're not keeping Shabbos. The reason why why do I say you have to do that? Because essentially, most people don't really violate things of Shabbos most of the times. If you cook or something like that, but consciously you probably aren't even realizing that you're violating Shabbos, or most of the time, most things have to do with the field and stuff like that. You don't really run into that very often, unless you're consciously trying to. So what's he saying? He's essentially saying what I said. The problem I have with that, of course, he mentions Rashi. His mentioning Rashi is going to be confusing to people, because he says Gamasa, what you're supposed to do is not that. You're supposed to have. You have the concept of Shabbos. You have the concept, not the actions of Shabbos, but the concept. Rest of the it's a day of rest. It's a day of Hashem. Think more about Hashem than you usually do weekdays.
Hey, Veronica, what do you think of that? What he's just saying? It's beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff.
Right. That's fine. You're not going to get in trouble anyway. But for example, we know there's people that light candles and they actually make a blessing over it and stuff like that, and they do it every week, and they have in mind, I'm just doing this. I'm not keeping Shabbos, but I'm just keeping this thing. Well, you've now made a mitzvah for yourself. Lighting candles is extremely important. Why is lighting candles extremely important? Because when a woman lights candles, that makes it Shabbos for her. Once a woman lights candles, it is making it Shabbos.
Amazing. Yeah, it's alive. It's real.
So once you make it Shabbos, well, you've accepted upon yourself Shabbos and all kinds of stuff like that. You're actually doing an act which is extremely significant. Besides the fact, I saw one when I don't know. I'm not going to. She probably knows if she's listening. She knows who she is. That she covers her eyes to make all kinds of. That's just imitation. We've saw it. Yeah. Let's start. Yeah. Okay, my little girls imitated my wife when they were younger because kids imitate their parents. So imitate, but imitation it may be flattery, but it can be a problem because if you're doing it, that has a specific, a very technical reason why a woman does that. It only applies to a Jewish woman who's being accepting of herself Shabbos. It's very complicated. It has to do Jewish laws, and it's just not something that applies to us. So again, let's go back to it. Rabbi Schwartz is not saying much different than me. That essentially, the concept of Shabbos you have in mind, but you shouldn't keep the things there. And he'll go. I mean, but you want to do something. Well, you could. But again, the bottom line is, even if you're going to do something, you have to be careful that you're not going to do it and start thinking that it's a mitzvah. That you're not thinking that you're keeping commandment.
Boy, that's so relieving.
Okay.
Relieving to hear.
Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to finish this up, even though it's late. We went a little bit over time. I'd like to deal with just something. Next week, I hope to. I haven't finished all my notes for it. Next week we have to go to the second mitzvah, which is cursing Hashem.
Right.
It's got a bunch of stuff with that. I haven't finished it up, so if I'm not ready for next week, when I do it the week afterwards, because I have so many obligations, it's hard for me to judge which one I did more, which one I'm farther behind on. It's hard. Okay, so let's do it. As far as serving Hashem, I want to point out a couple of midas, character traits, that in a sense relate to the concept of your belief in God, or not worshiping idols and belief in God. And the rabbis refer to, and I want to just give you an idea to understand why there's a sort of linkage. And again, these are not requirements, but certainly you recognize that these are things that a person should certainly do, that they're character traits which are worthy of a person to do. The first one is anger, avoidance of anger. Okay?
Well, it's like idol worship, isn't it?
The Gemara says, everybody who gets angered is as if they worshipped an idol. Why is that? Anger comes from basically forgetting that there's a God in the world. Why do you get anger back? Because something didn't happen the way you thought it should happen.
Well, self-worship, yeah.
Somebody didn't treat you the way you thought you were supposed to be treated. But if you understand there's a God in the world, and we're going to talk about the 13 fundamentals of Judaism, eventually we can go each one. If you understand that God rules and controls the world, and everything essentially is part of God's plan, then you're not going to get angry because you're really getting angry at God. Why did God do this? Okay,
forbid, yeah.
That's what. So that's why anger is considered to be close to idol. It is not idol worship, obviously. So it's not really a prohibition for a Noahide. It's not even a rabbinical prohibition for a Noahide in the same sense. But in a sense, it's a character trait which has similarities to idol worship and denial of God. Because by being angry, your anger comes about from not recognizing that something is from Hashem.
Right, like a child stamping their feet, pouting.
Yeah, right. You're getting angry because people aren't. It's not. The world isn't working the way you want it to. But again, it's Hashem who runs the world. So what's the next one is arrogance, gava, arrogance. There's another Gemara, I think Tractate Tzaitis, where it says that a person who's arrogant, Hashem can't be in in the area around him. He runs away from it. I'll tell you a cute story with this. I heard it from one of my rabbis. There was in early 16th century Sfas. It was a city of Kabbalists, and they were very great. The Rebbe was the holy Ariyah Kudish, the Isaac Luria. The rabbi of the city was the Beis Yosef Karo, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch. He was a rabbi in the city. There was somebody who gave drushas, who used to give the sermons every week. His name was Moshe Alshach, the Heilig Alshach, was a very, very well-known person. The chazan, the cantor in the shul, was Rabbi Shlomo Akhaibitz. He was the brother-in-law of Moshe Kadvaro. He wrote a very famous poem that in all over Judaism we sing Friday night called the Chodoidi. The Gaba in the shul was a fellow called Eliezer Ashkenazi. He wrote a very significant work called Sefer Charaidim, the Book of Those Who Fear God, which is very important. We're talking about just, the city was filled with beautiful, really great and holy people there. it was a collection. It was a at that time. It was like a coming together of like phenomenal people in the world. So the story I heard is like this. One time, it was which was I can't remember which part. Chayasura. I can't remember which part it was. And the Alshach was giving one of his drushas, and he was talking about the story with Yaakov and his father-in-law Reuven, and explaining how Reuven was, changing the reward, his payment, what he's supposed to get. He's supposed to be paid this, then Reuven would come back, no, I changed it to this one. No, you changed it. He kept changing it. And every time he changed it, Hashem made it work. So the Alshach sees the Riyah Kudish, Rabbi Isaac Luria, was sitting there, and he starts smiling. And he felt really broken up. He felt very broken up. So after the drusha, he goes up to his rabbi. He said, Rabbi, what did I do wrong? You were laughing at my drusha. He said, I wasn't laughing at your drusha. When you were telling the story of how Reuven changed the reward that Yaakov was getting, I saw Meluchim come down with Reuven. And every time you said he changed from this to this, they would ask Reuven if that was true. And Reuven would shake his head up and down. And, he kept shaking his head up and down. I see Reuven shaking his head up. I started laughing because it looks funny. The next week, the Alshach was giving another drusha. He was giving another talk. And all of a sudden, the Ari gets up and walks out. So the Alshach asks him, why did you walk away? What happened? He said, in the middle of the drusha, in the middle of your sermon you were talking about, you remembered last week about the angels, and you started feeling, a little bit of, gaiva, this, and the Shekhinah, the holiness, all left. So I left with it. But the point of the Masa is, the point of first of all, these are very holy. We're not talking about you, me, and something like that. We're talking about people who's phenomenal.
Much holier, yes, definitely.
But there are stories of the Yekudis, miracles and stuff they did. But the point is, when I'm talking about the idea of arrogance, how that Hashem cannot be together with somebody who's arrogant. Okay, let's leave it this week. I will let you know if I'll be ready for next week, because I'm in the middle of 3 or 4 different. I give like so many classes and stuff like that.
Oh well, I want to thank you. Today was very special for me.
And I'm sorry it went over about a half hour, but I figured I did.
It's all good, Rabbi. My wife's on afternoon shift, so it's the opposite ones when she's on day shift. She wants to spend time with me, which is so beautiful. And if I go too long, she's tired. She has to get up early. So when she's on afternoons, hey, we could go for hours if you really wanted to. But I thank you that you prepare these lessons, and they're thought out. They're well thought out.
Let me ask you a question while we're at it. Are there any questions in there actually before we break?
There's been a vast conversation. We've got a fellow who's been joining us for a little while now. His name's Zakia on the chat box. He's from Peru. Been inquiring a lot, and it's good to see Veronica, who's been around a number of years, share more. We've had some questions brought up by someone named Shepherd's Outcry quite a bit. Jeffrey, let me just scroll through. A lot of.
If there's a question, I'll answer it. I'll wait for a few more minutes, but otherwise, we'll let it go.
Yeah, there's a lot of chat. The chat box got going so fast tonight that I wasn't able to keep up reading it as it was going and still pay full attention, because to me, I get to the point where it's like, okay, there seems to be good vibes in the chat room, and I really learned from you tonight, Rabbi, and so it meant a lot to me. But more than that, it's just beautiful to hear how it's real and should be real. And I really appreciate you standing in the position that you're in, because I talk with a lot of other rabbis. They use you as a benchmark in a lot of respects, and they like, most of us, couldn't handle to be in the debate between some of you rabbis. We just couldn't. It just flying over our heads. But in reality, to hear the soundness from one side in a well thought out position, It allows us to digest it, decipher it, and learn that, hey, wait a second, this is deep. And then when we hear from the other side, okay, maybe there's something, but then you're very clear. This is where the position is. This is where the majority lies. This is why, and it starts to become alive. And so it's always a joy to get your learned position.
You
Thank
have
you.
again. You have to understand something. I mean, people that I've met and been involved with Noahides, for the most part, the big name people, these people are very sincere. They're really trying to do it, and it is a very difficult thing to put it in such a way to not push off somebody who seriously wants to do something, because something, some people are more ideologically that, some people just stomazoi, but but again, it's very important that you understand what's actually being said. And this one of the problems is of course, you maybe
Definition of terms.
you may be a very big scholar, but you may not be able to explain it in a way that the person actually understands what you're trying to say to them. And that's what's the important part. It's not so much, you'll see when we go through things, you see that I don't really so much disagree with people. I'm just trying to bring out clearer points that they have there, that this is what they're saying.
You provoke critical thinking in people. This class today, I think, provoked critical thinking in Noahide's minds beyond what it brought. But Rabbi, before we close, Veronica's thrown out here. She says, please ask Rabbi to tell everyone the importance of having a rabbi give us direction.
Yeah, eventually what will happen is you know what to do. It's like with Jewish people, for example. I don't run to a rabbi every weekend now. It's not just because I know how to learn things. It's because after a amount of time, you know what it is. You grow up under certain things, so you see obviously certain things that your rabbis, you learn and stuff like that. So you know a lot of these things. Whereas with Noahides, there's a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of different views and books, and you can't really make out the difference between some of these things you don't know. And hopefully, at least what I'm going to do here is at least gives you the background, so when you're reading something in English from somebody, read Divine Code, for example, or you read other works that are out there. Some other works that some are better, some are worse, as far as I'm concerned. When you read those things, you can understand. Oh, this person is saying this because he follows always this person's view. But there's other people who don't do it that way, or he says this and this, but I don't think he understood this correctly, because for Rabbi Shulman, it's a little bit more complicated than what he's saying. There's more conditions involved in doing this. So if you know what it is, then you read people and you say, oh, okay, I know what he's saying, and yeah, I could do this way, or what, but you need to have somebody to guide you in a lot of ways. You'll get to a certain point that you won't need very much. You just every once in a while come up with a question that you think's a question. And then you need to have somebody who's going to take, understands it. If somebody asks a question, even if you think it's really a foolish question, that you're just going to answer the question, understand. There's a very famous story. Somebody went to, I can't remember what the question was, but it was really a stupid question. It was like really such a simple question. So there was a rabbi sitting learning, and one of his students was there. So this person came in and asked him a question. And the guy sitting there, this is like, it's not even a question. So the rabbi said, 1 second, let me think about that. And he took out one of his books and he looked around here, and then took out, and he said,
It just kept looking and looking.
And then after looking for like 10 minutes of the way, he closed the book and said, it's allowed. And he walked out. So the guy asked him, why did you do that? I said, listen, if I answered him too quickly, or I didn't show him that, take it seriously, he's not going to come and ask me anymore. By doing that, he sees that I take him seriously, even so it was a stupid question. What's the big deal? But he has to feel when he goes out there that I seriously think about what he says, and that's something that's also important. So you have to have a rabbi that you feel comfortable with, and that makes you feel comfortable asking him questions.
Yes, exactly, Rabbi. All I can say is, serving people the way they can ingest. It's an art. It's more than just an art. Rabbis know what to share, but in what circumstance? It's just amazing. But when you're dealing with people, there's so many different types of people, so many different angles they come from. I stand in awe that you take the time to actually get to know, talk, share, and then Yeah, to share that as a story. I mean, sometimes that's all he needed was just 10 minutes of silence and make it seem like you were actually, yeah. I find Rabbi, when people discover that it's their idea, you could have been talking to them for about a year. When they think it's their idea, they get it. It's kind of amazing. But
So anyway,
Torah
let
is
me,
so
I'm getting
unique.
late. Unless there's another question, I do see it's very late for me. Remember, I get up early. I hope to finish for next week. I'm not really sure. Might be 2 weeks from now, maybe 3 weeks from now, maybe I think a little less. But we're doing the next mitzvah anyways, which is the second. So if I break between the mitzvahs, I'm,
That's fine. Okay, so tentative, possibly not next week. If I know a day in advance, folks, I'll post it on social media. But I always
it's like
appreciate
this.
Rabbi Shulman.
Speak to me on Sunday evening before my Tanakh talk class.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug here. Listen, I could give you my email address for PayPal also if I wanted to.
No, check him out on Tanakh Talk. Beautiful show, folks.
Shameless plug. But yeah, anyway, so I still have some things that I have to prepare for that. Once that's prepared, then I'll have more time to go back to this. I have most of the stuff for this. I just have to go to write all the sources what I'm going to use. Because on here I have the sources where I'm looking at. So I have all this form that I need together so I can bring it out. It'll go quicker, Except for the one time when I forgot something I had to get out of my.
Rabbi, we appreciate it also. Possibly not next week, folks, but we'll let you know. And if it's going to happen, you'll see it out there on social media. Feel free to write some questions, folks. Send them to Rabbi Shulman if you know him, if you're connected with him on social media, or you can send something to me. I'll make sure, address it to Rabbi Shulman, even to me, and I'll make sure that he gets the questions.
Yeah. By the way, Dan, if people send enough questions, even if I'm not ready to continue further with this, I'll just take next week and answer questions.
Yeah, we could do a whole. Hey, there's something, folks, right there. He'll do a whole show on questions. So throw them out there, 3, 4 each, folks, and we've got more than a couple of shows. So Rabbi Shulman's willing to answer. So that's a possibility as well. We hope to see some questions from you. So until possibly next week, folks, have a wonderful, wonderful week.
Okay.